in your book sort of a series toward the beginning of how the actual process works of forming one of these ideas and selling it and rejecting the proof. Maybe you could just kind of march us through this as a model of it.
All right, there's a 4-stage pattern. And in the first stage is what I call the crisis. And so we're hyped to believe that something is a terrible crisis for which something must be done. What was fascinating to me in doing the research for the book is that very often the thing that's said to be in crisis has often been getting better for years on end. But that gets ignored. Then the second stage is...
For example, infant mortality, to use one of the...
Well, I'm thinking about teenage pregnancy and venereal disease. Those things were getting better. Teenage pregnancy was going down for more than a decade before sex education was introduced. Venereal disease, syphilis in 1960s had only half the incidence that it had in 1950. So all these things are going down, yet we're said to need sex education to deal with this crisis, which is then manufactured. And again, this is where the calculated part comes in. Now, 99% of the people who hear this don't know that. But the reason they accept it is because they also share the same vision. And because this is consonant with that vision, they don't have to ask for evidence.
All right, so what's stage two?
Stage two is
the first one is there's a crisis.
Yes.
They establish a crisis, usually an artificial one.
Yes.
Okay.
Then stage two is the solution. You have a solution for this crisis. In this case, you have sex education in the schools. And then at that point, you say, if we do this, this will lead to beneficial result A. The critics say, no, it'll lead to detrimental result Z. Stage three, you put it in the results, you put it in, and directly you find detrimental result Z, namely venereal disease and teenage pregnancy take off into the stratosphere. And then stage four is the fascinating part, in which they simply say, no, that doesn't prove that this was a bad policy, because there are many factors. There's complexity. It's simplistic to blame it on this. But they run through this routine on so many different things, including crime. Similarly, they said, in 1960, Judge Bazelon said we just desperately need to have some kind of change in the criminal justice system. Now, in 1960, there were fewer murders than there had been in 1950, 1940, or 1930. But again, that was completely ignored. And so now we have the revolution in the criminal justice system. People say, no, if you have put these new things in, there'll be more crime than before. They put them in. Almost instantly, the declining crime rate turns around and heads up again. And they say, no, it's simplistic to blame this on this. There are the root causes and the neglect of society and all the rest of it. So it's heads I win, tails you lose.
So to go to that earliest example that you gave, you think the increase in venereal disease was caused by sex education?
I don't have to even say that. I don't even have to believe that. All I have to say is
do you?
Oh, I think it's hard to explain otherwise. I mean, you don't get social changes that drastic in a few years without some particular cause. But the argument doesn't depend on that at all. The point is they created the crisis artificially. The evidence shows there was no crisis, but they would not even subject it to any empirical test. If they want to show some other factor came in and really caused this, I'm happy to hear that.
Now, why would a group of liberal intellectuals or politicians or media stars or whatever, why would they sit around and decide to dismember or dilute the criminal justice system if they thought in advance that it would raise the amount of criminality?
Oh, they didn't think that, but the point is...
They just thought wrongly that it would help.
Yes, but it would also give them an enormously larger role than they had before. I mean, a judge who just sits there and applies the laws that have been passed by the legislature has a very minor role. But if he takes the expansive judicial activist role, then of course he's on the leading edge, and he can look for the hosannas and all the rest of it from the sideline.
How does this play out in the realm of something else you have written about, which is affirmative action?
Exactly the same
How does
thing.
that process? What's the 1, 2, 3, 4 on that?
I haven't worked it out like that, but certainly there is no interest whatever in finding out empirically whether things have been made better or worse for minorities as a result of this program. And in fact, if you bring them up evidence, they'll say, but things would have been even worse had we not done this. Similarly with the war on poverty, you can show how dependency on government was going down, poverty was going down before this program was ever put in. And within a few years, dependence on government was going up And after a few more years, the absolute number of people in poverty was going up.
Yeah, I read that in your book, but the absolute number of poverty is not the data. The relevant data would be the rate of poverty.
Oh,
and the rate of poverty, in fact, in the 1970s, I worked for President Johnson, so we have to establish there. You know, so I mean, the line we took was that during the 1960s, during the Kennedy-Johnson administration, poverty did in fact go down sharply. And then the rate since then, not the absolute number because the country has grown larger, the rate has sort of bounced around at about flat, somewhere between 12 and 15%.
Yes, but don't forget, this was sold to the country, not on the grounds that if you transferred money from A to B, that B would have more money. That was not the argument. The argument was that dependency would be reduced, that you would, quote, invest in people, as Bill Clinton is now saying, now that people have forgotten what was said in the 60s. This will then, you give them job training and all those kinds of things, parenting skills, the whole bit. And this will then be an investment that will pay off in the future because there'll be fewer people dependent upon the government than there were before. And I go through a great number of people from John F. Kennedy to Lyndon Johnson, the New York Times, again, all the usual suspects. Said all these things.
Lyndon Johnson was not a usual suspect, Tom.
Well, he was the primary suspect. All right. But the fact is that was never tested. And when there were all these wonderful retrospectives held down in Texas and other places about this, the first order of business is to evade the criterion that they themselves set up when they set this out. And so no matter what happens, if it's a failure by the original criterion, then we just find another criterion by which it will be a success.